community-centered conversation. And so the goal is to really talk about real projects that are happening in Georgia and giving residents and community stakeholders the ability to be able to not only negotiate if that time comes with community benefits agreements, but then also really be able to advocate for what they do want or what they don't want in their community. So with that, we'll start, and I'm not on my phone. I just have my agenda on my phone, so just wanted you all to know that. So we're setting the context about what's actually happening in Georgia. And right now, our state, when it comes to our power bills, we pay the largest, we've seen the largest rate increase in our state's history in regards to our power bills. So if you pay Georgia power bills, your rates have gone up thanks to the Georgia Public Service Commission 6 times within the last 2 years. And also we've seen not only that, land use changes throughout the state. So what I mean by that is that in our rural communities, obviously a lot of the land is being taken up due to data centers and other industries or industrial facilities. And then lastly, what we've also seen is just an increase in energy demand. So the Georgia Public Service Commission has also approved a lot of data centers, and when I say data centers to come into the state, and because of that, they have approved rate increases, meaning that ratepayers, Georgia Power customers, so I'm a Georgia Power customer, we actually pay for that construction and we pay for that implementation. So one of the things that we advocated for as an organization, Georgia WAND did, is that we wanted data centers to pay their own way, which means that if you're coming to the state with Senate Bill 34, you should be required to pay your own way. But that obviously did not pass. So the responsibility is still on ratepayers. And so we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to have this discussion because this is something very dear and near to all Georgians. So what is a CBA? And Cam, I'll let you take that.
Okay, so actually before I get into exactly what a CBA is, I want to go back to the zoning point that you made because I think it's very important.
Okay.
One of the things that I think is important, one of the things that I think, one of the things that I think is important when talking about CBAs, which is community benefit agreements, is where you have leverage as the community. Because to get into the definition of a community benefits agreement, it is essentially a contract between the community and the developer. So it's, you negotiate. When you have a contract, you negotiate. And as the parties in a contract, you're looking for what leverage you have to get what you want out of this contract from the other party. And zoning is a really important part of that because there is by right zoning and then variant zoning, which just means that if an organization buys a plot of land, if it's by right zoning, then they can build whatever they want on it. But if they need a variance, now they have to go to some government body, they have to answer to the community, and that's when the community can make sure that they're getting certain benefits out of this project. So, right, a community benefits agreement is a contract between the community and the developers where the community says there are certain benefits that we need to get out of this project if you want to proceed with the project. An important thing to note with that is that you believe the project is going through. So one of the things that's the first step with a CBA is, do you think that this project is going to proceed? Do you think this project is not going to proceed? And if you think it is going to proceed, how can the community ensure that it has certain promises from the developer around jobs in the community, around certain environmental protections in the community, These are some of the things that community benefit agreements usually revolve around. So it's important for the community to know what are our priorities, and when we go into this negotiation, what do we want to get out of the negotiation?
And then additionally, yeah, come on. How you doing, Dr. Muhammad? So a key policy question that we really want to also include is when corporations drive demand, or utilities and or if data centers drive demand, who pays and who benefits? So I'll break there and say, and I want to kind of open that dialogue up. So we want to introduce CBAs not necessarily as a solution, but it is something that can be used as almost an amenity, a tool to ensure community protections, investments, and accountability, okay? So if we're talking about a CBA, and we're talking about doing this listening session, one of the things that I really want to drive home is that when we think about CBAs, they obviously have to be connected to the context of the neighborhood. It needs to be rooted in the neighborhood and in the community, and it needs to be driven and rooted by the community, which means that community stakeholders need to be at the forefront at all times. And so one of the things that we really wanted to ask in this listening session is, what concerns you most about the growth of not only data centers, because we're not just talking about data centers tonight, energy projects or utility projects, infrastructure projects, or just big commercial developments in your community? And we can pass around the microphone.
Well, my concern is in a business development like a data center or an infrastructure project, it goes into great detail about projects, goes into great detail about programs, goes into great detail about initiatives and the cost of a project or a program or an initiative, the description of a project, a program, an initiative, and all the deliverables are in great detail spelled out with tactics, strategies, and accountability. But when it comes with the distinction community, that's missing. So what I'm concerned about is the absence of community participation specifics, community stakeholder specifics, community critical stakeholder benefits, and particularly community partnership benefits. So I'm concerned that participation, stakeholder, critical stakeholder, and partnerships do not get the same degree of specificity for plan, develop, evaluate, and analyze that projects and programs do. So I'm watchful to see. There's your project language and there's your program language. Is there a match for community participation? There's the project language and the program language. Is there a match for community stakeholders? There's the project language and the program language. Is there a match for community partnerships? Is there a match for community partnerships socially, economically, and then the integrity, the basic integrity of human rights have to be preserved. So those are my concerns about what's missing in normally structural agreements that we need for a community benefit agreement process to have integrity.
1 second, she has to.
Hello, everyone. So I work at a data center, and I believe one of the points that they bring to the community is that it's going to create jobs. And while it does to some degree, for the most part, they hire a lot of contractors, temporary people who go through temp agencies, so they don't plan on keeping the positions open for that long. It's like they just like hire the people just to get it up and running, just for like 3 months. So it's not really that beneficial for the community, if you ask me. And a lot of the data centers are going to automation, so that's something to keep in mind. Absolutely.
Hi, my name is Sharice Brown, and one of my biggest concerns with community benefits and big developments coming into our community, the divide and conquer method that they use to get what they want. So I think that it's very important that a coalition of communities that's impacted by this development should come together and negotiate, learn how to negotiate and survey the community, see what their needs are. Because sometimes they want to offer you things that, I'm not going to say you couldn't use, but that's not the most important thing you need in your community. So I think to stay organized, negotiate, learn to negotiate, and then put in your demands. But I think it should be community-driven, not just with the Turner Field Coalition I was a part of. And we had an oversight committee, and we wrote our own resolution because we didn't want the city to be the oversight over our board. We wanted community people. And so we did get our way with that, but I'm saying it's a different game when you're watching what's going on with the benefits, because you know more about your community than they do, and we're closer to the problem. So that's one of the concerns I have, the divide and conquer.
Good afternoon, good evening. My concern is around the entitlement of coming into a space that's not yours and setting up a massive business that's not necessarily a business that serves people or hires people, and destroys land, destroys environment, destroys people's well-being, raises property rates. And this is just how the system works. This is how capitalism works. A community benefits agreement definitely needs to have a large coalition of people, because without like numbers and power, it'll just be like patronizing and, like, let's just keep the community quiet, because that's just how they, at the end of the day, act. Because if it disturbs their profit-making apparatus, then they're not gonna move an inch, a substantial, reasonable amount at all. So that's been my concern with the data centers, with the Rivian plant, the nuclear plants, everything that's the Microsoft Center, everything that's trying to be happening right now.
Thank you. Should I say my name?
Oh, yeah.
My name is Jamie Roberts. My concern is from my experience with how I'm a resident of Southwest Cab and how the whole Cop City thing went down. Still leaves kind of a bad taste in my mouth, because it was a deal between the city of Atlanta and DeKalb County, where the citizens of Southwest DeKalb weren't consulted. There was, the neighborhood. I think the neighborhood association. I want to say maybe, that were close in. I think we're divided on the issue, and I don't think they were made part of the process. And those were the folks in the city of Atlanta, I think on the west side of Moreland. For those of us in Southwest DeKalb who benefited from the tree cover that the area where Cop City was, you know, all those trees got cut down and without any meaningful public input from the people in Southwest DeKalb where it was immediately located. And then when the people in the city of Atlanta tried to have a referendum, the city took them, you know, stalled. They had to, and then, you know, they went to court and basically ran out the clock and continued construction of Cop City and made a mockery of the referendum process. So I'm not terribly encouraged, and you know, to hear about a data center wanting to come in and, you know, with DeKalb County, you know, they're great deals for the county because the data center companies are, you know, pay a lot in property taxes. However, the costs are socialized with the people, you know, over the backs of the people in the community. You know, the lack of tree cover, the power that it takes to run these data centers. There's not even a requirement that they try to source sustainable power for these, you know. Instead of, you know, putting solar panels on the roof, you know, and utilizing the square footage that they have on the property to make these things as sustainable as possible, they're letting data centers bring in these big Caterpillar, you know, fossil fuel generators that are going to generate a lot of, you know, pollution that is going to be borne by the people immediately adjacent to the property. And so, you know, when people talk about the need for accountability, absolutely, there is such a need for accountability around big projects like this that, in my experience, has been completely lacking. And so, and you know, the county, you know, and the dynamics of DeKalb County in particular, because our state government has encouraged the cityhood movement where these cities have popped up in DeKalb County, taking, you know, the taxes and resources away from the county itself. It seems like the county governments have great incentive to invite the data centers in so they can recover some of the revenue that they've lost from these cities like Brookhaven and Tucker and Dunwoody that have popped up. And it feels, you know, also the leadership in DeKalb County. I remember, you know, just little things like, you know, during the pandemic when they were short on labor for the recycling program, and so they just stopped processing the recycling. They just took the recycling to the landfill and didn't tell anybody. And it wasn't until, you know, the CEO got caught by the local paper that he admitted that was happening. So, you know, just for DeKalb County, I don't have a whole lot of trust in the county government to be forthcoming and accountable to begin with. So that's kind of where I'm at.
So again, I just kind of want to set the context and the framework for tonight's discussion before I introduce our council member. So again, Georgia's seeing a rapid investment in growth in not only energy infrastructure, data centers, but large-scale development projects throughout the state. So we're not just talking about data centers tonight. This is happening to a lot of residents all across the state of Georgia. So we want to be cognizant of that, and we have people also online that are watching and wanting to get information. But these projects impact not only our health and our wealth, but also our long-term investments. So here, what Georgia WAND has done and what we're starting to do is to create these conversations and have these statewide and regional conversations about how community benefits agreements can benefit not only you, your community, but generations to come. And so that's what this conversation is about tonight. So with that, I want to bring up our council member, Jason Dozier, and allow him to introduce himself and bring greetings to the group. Thank you.
Apologies for being late, first and foremost. I appreciate y'all for gathering this evening. I know any sort of community meeting on a weeknight can be tough. It's dinner time. Some of y'all have kids and family. I brought my oldest with me. She's watching K-pop Demon Hunters over there. But I think it's important to have conversations like this, to share knowledge, to share experiences, to share stories, both positive and negative. I got into this work on the Atlanta City Council largely through this fight around community benefits agreements. Back over a decade ago, I got to know Ms. Brown and others in the Peoplestown and Mechanicsville and Summerhill communities when the Atlanta Braves decided they were going to move to Cobb County. I was active with an organization called the Turnerfield Community Benefits Coalition, and as a new resident of the Mechanicsville community, as a baby community organizer, joined with neighbors who wanted to see a better way forward. And unfortunately, we weren't successful in getting a CBA, but that frustration with City Hall, with our county leadership, with our state leadership, inspired me to run for office and run for city council, and was able to unseat my predecessor, who unfortunately was not an ally in this work. A lot of the things I've heard since I've been here are issues that we've been dealing with on Atlanta City Council. I was proud, before I was elected, to organize around and in the Entrenchment Creek watershed. And the first time that Cop City came up on the legislation to do that agreement, the first time was on the other side of the dais advocating for a different path, and then as a city council member voted against it. Since then, I know the overall discussion isn't about data centers, but I've been proud to lead the work on the Atlanta City Council to keep data centers out of in-town Atlanta. And we have another data center fight coming up in a few weeks, but I think the work that I've done with the community as an organizer and with folks who've been really grounded and lived and breathed in all this sort of aspects of this work really inspired me in my day-to-day work on the Atlanta City Council. So I'm just glad to be here. Welcome to Atlanta City Council District 4. Welcome to historic West End. And I'm just glad to listen for a little bit before I say I'm triple booked tonight. So thankfully my other meeting is in the same complex. And then we're potty training our 2-year-old. So we got a lot going on tonight. So thank y'all for allowing me to be here. But I just want to listen and hear more stories. And then I don't have any cards with me, but I will invite you all next Tuesday. We're hosting our District 4 Town Hall at the Tabernacle in downtown Atlanta. And so if you have any specific questions about anything we're working on, legislative initiatives, issues how I feel about certain things that we're talking about in the city, please come to our town hall next Tuesday, Tabernacle from 6 to 8, and we'll feed you. We want to make sure that folks who have issues with their city government at least have full bellies. So thank y'all, and glad to be here.
Although we didn't get a CBA from the Turnerfield Coalition, we didn't give up. We still went behind the taxes from rental cars and hotel, and was able to get $5 million to start the trust fund board over the money that we received. $1 million from the city and $4 million from ACRA. So I still consider it a benefit. It benefited the community.
Hi, I'm Dana. I live in Grant Park. I work in CBAs for renewable energy. I'm originally from Western Pennsylvania, so to see another extractive industry is not even scary, just, I don't know. You had asked in the beginning, what do we picture? And I keep seeing just these, like this graveyard of just old busted warehouses with e-waste in it. Like old malls, all the old real estate that just, the big rust belt, just rusting, busted, old, and nobody, you know, reclaiming it or responsible for the repurpose, what's the word, decommissioning. And even so, what would that mean, shipping all that e-waste to another country? You know, so that's kind of where I'm approaching it. I love working in CBAs for renewable energy because I want communities to have renewable energy, and if they don't want it, that I hear that, like moving on. But do I want to see a community with a data center? I don't know. I guess that's up to them. I feel like they could be designed so much better, more efficient, prettier, for lack of, you know, have solar on the top. The fact that they don't put solar on the top is such a insult. So my company, we have a new solution to help, one, draft CBAs, emphasis on draft. Still got to take it to an attorney, but also track and monitor and report on CBAs. Right now, it's just for renewable energy, and I'm just trying to listen and understand how perhaps we can do more than that application. Thanks. Thanks for hosting this.
So I would say with the CBAs, one of the things, if we were talking about data centers, right? So I mentioned earlier that Georgia is second in data center growth in the nation. Right now, data centers are hitting urban and rural areas. One of the things in CBAs that would be important that we've seen on the rural side is land protection, as well as on the urban side, involving some type of compensation when it comes to economic development and renewable energy initiatives. Now, that's not saying that anybody is supporting data centers. What we're saying is that if tonight's conversation is going to be successful, tonight's conversation is going to be about protecting and making sure that our communities walk away with benefits that are beneficial to us and not just monetary. Okay? So those are, I just want to make that distinction as well. When we talk about utility projects, one of the things that we've also seen and something to consider in your CBA is the difference between an easement, a temporary or permanent easement, and then negotiating with that utility or that private developer or that for-profit business about further use and how they actually access that property. One of the things that has really been driving this conversation as well is that our partners in Fairburn, Georgia, and Union City have been hit hard with utility infrastructure and data centers actually coming in their communities, tearing down trees. A lot of these communities are not having any CBAs. Actually, they have been hit with NDAs or non-disclosure agreements, which means that they don't get any compensation at all. So by the time they wake up in the morning, trees are down, data centers or whatever the utility project or whatever the large-scale development is already built in their backyard. So they don't even have the opportunity to negotiate. So one of the things that we really want to drive forward as well in this conversation is the ability to be able to get around the non-disclosure agreements such that communities can talk about the impacts from an economic standpoint, but also public health and what that means for them, their communities, and other stakeholders. So I wanted to make that distinction because we do have people on the call and in the room that are not maybe in the urban area as well. Cam, you want to go to the next question?
And also one more note, based off of what you said, in the room today because one way to think about CBAs is as an organizing tool, because you have to come together as the community to figure out what is it that we want. My folks who were involved in other movements, like this stuff can bind you together, and then it can help you with the next initiative and the next initiative. And institutional knowledge is so important. So I just wanted to make that note before we go on to the next question. So we wanted to ask, have you seen or experienced any impacts regarding displacement already when it comes to large infrastructure projects, whether that's increase in utility bills, increase in noise, traffic, flooding, or anything like that? Has anyone already felt some effects of these large-scale infrastructure projects?
Do you want to talk first? Okay. Well, displacement occurs as an immediate ripple effect. So once the word, quote unquote, gets out, that a major infrastructure business like a data center is coming to a community, then the investment criteria jumps off the scale. And so the investment community gets involved, begin to look at housing and who owns the housing, who owns properties that are up for rental, and they move in either as partnerships or owning it. And the displacement factor increases 1,000% per month. So just the fact that a major infrastructure project is coming, the displacement kicks in automatically. So the question becomes, how do we get out ahead of the game? You know, one of the things you mentioned was with the citizens in South Fulton, they had to do an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. Well, a non-disclosure agreement generally is someone who is a part of the business. So if a community is going to be asked to do an NDA, that means the community deserves to be a part of the business, a part of the benefit, a part of the design. So if we can have community to do that, it would be useful. Most of the time, community doesn't have the capacity to bring in that kind of legal reference point. I'm going to put in a plug for my buddy Hakeem here, who worked with CBAs, began to design that kind of community participation from the very onset before anything even got put in writing. So it's be useful. Yes, bring on the non-disclosure agreement, but that means that the community gets to be a partner in the very design of the benefits that can come to neighborhoods and communities.
So I just think about where we're sitting right now, and I'm thinking about the community who did not have the opportunity to enter into a community benefit agreement about this location here. And to your point around the real estate and the quick, very sharp increase around residential housing that is flipping right before our eyes in terms of a legacy of disinvestment, that once the investment comes, those that bear the burden of the disinvestment don't benefit now from all the investment that has taken place. I recently found out in terms of what our neighboring states are doing around community benefit agreements, only because we're in the South and there's this thing called precedence. In July of last year, Tennessee had a partial ban on community benefit agreements that for companies, not all, but for companies that receive state incentives. So now we're thinking about the companies that are using tax breaks and these other TAD, all of these things, and what that now means for community members not being able to enter into these third-party agreements. And something that as we're having this conversation and our General Assembly has not been made aware enough to take on that practice, that we also make sure that we raise that up, that as that becomes more known within the sphere of private entities or corporations now leveraging that bill to say, hey, let's put some lobbyists in the Georgia Assembly to lobby for a bill similar to what just passed in Tennessee. That would then put us at risk. So I just want to just say what that bill was, and when I found out, it broke my heart, and I said, well, my job is to tell as many people that I knew and know about it, and I think this is a great forum because you all are talking about community benefits. It is Tennessee's Senate Bill 1074, House Bill 1096. And again, this passed in July of last year, and it's operating right now. And so it's limiting this conversation because most of the things that the data centers, the sports arenas leverage are the tax breaks. So now if you're levying a state tax break and you're under this, they are not legally bound now to have to enter into an agreement.
Thank you. One of the comments in the chat, so I'm going to start reading some of them, is a significant concern, and thank you, Alex, that they have is that no amount of CBA is going to shield the community from air pollution, water consumption during a drought, and that they would assume that what is enforced in a CBA cannot be stronger than city and state law, which is true. That's why you want a legal and enforceable CBA, and one that you have an attorney and legal participation in, such that it would be in compliance with city and state law and not in conflict with it. So I just kind of wanted to read that and clarify that. So one of the ways that enforceability, and some of the people in the room that have worked on previous CBAs, and what we're suggesting is that you have a governing body or governing authority made up of community stakeholders. And those community stakeholders with the management team would be responsible for the enforceability of the CBA. With legal, yes.
If I could speak on that for a second. So, a couple of things. On the previous comment, any contract has to comply with the law, right? That does not mean that a contract cannot be stronger or have more protections than the law originally gives you. An example that I can think of off the top of my head is we all, if you sign up for any internet service or anything like that, there are certain things that when you go through the terms and services and it says, I accept this, you actually are entering into an agreement. You're signing a contract. And in that, one of the things that many people, because it's so long, don't really see is that there's an arbitration clause. And so now you're saying, I agree to, if they violate this part of the contract, instead of being able to immediately sue them, take them to state court or federal court, you're now agreeing to go through the arbitration process. That complies with the law, but it does not, but it's also putting another right outside of the law. Or not outside of the law, excuse me. Because you're exchanging things, you're now saying, okay, we agree between us that we're gonna do this, whereas the law doesn't necessarily automatically assume that you've made that agreement. So all contracts must comply with the law, but a contract can also have additional protections that the law by itself might not necessarily give you.
Cop City was sued in federal court. Judge Mark Cohen said the city basically was in bad faith. The city appealed. It is still now after 2 years in the federal court of appeals. In the meantime, there was a rush put on. Cop City was built.
Okay, yes. Well, good evening. I'm Hakeem Hilliard. I'm an attorney here in Atlanta. I actually am a lawyer for Digital Realty. And so we were talking about CBAs, and I think you said is basically correct. I mean, I've been working on these issues for 30 years and about 50 pounds. I don't distinguish between CBAs and conditions of zoning when I'm negotiating zoning projects. I think zoning conditions that are accepted by local governments, as long as they are enforceable, are enforceable by those local governments, right? And I think those are powerful conditions, and those are powerful contracts that you're entering into when you enter into zoning conditions, because a local government can stop a project, right? For CBAs, quite frankly, I have not been a part of a negotiation for a CBA where there was any issue with enforceability. The Atlantic Station is the biggest project I've worked on. It did not have a CBA. It entered into zoning conditions, but there was public funds that was given to the project throughout the process. It was the second TAD, I think, tax allocation district in Georgia. The only time I heard anything come up was there was the people that lived along State Street near Atlantic Station wanted to have speed humps installed. And I can't remember if they weren't installed at all or they didn't install enough, but they had to litigate that issue. They had a lawyer in the community who litigated that issue. They were successful, and they got the speed humps. And so I've never seen the CBAs, enforceability, because there's political pressure on those contracts. It's not like normal contracts, you know? So if a developer doesn't do what they say they're gonna do, in addition to whatever legal consequence they have, they can't come back and do another project. And that's how they view it. So I'm just here to listen, really. I don't want to take over.
No, we won't let you take over the conversation. But I want Kim to go to the next question so we can make sure that we get all the questions answered.
The next question is, what benefits should be required for projects of this scale? So large-scale infrastructure projects. What are some things that you guys think must be in any community benefit agreement?
Is this a generic large scale, or is it specific to the data center on Ralph David Abernathy?
I think we're talking generally, but that specific project could be a good example from which you would want to say, in this example, I want these kinds of requirements in there. But this conversation is also about large-scale infrastructure projects at large.
I don't know why I have the microphone, because I don't have anything more to add to what you're saying.
One of the things that has to be in there is a defined accountability that's with community stakeholders to review all of the existing scopes of work. So if a project is coming into the community should have a line-by-line accountability for review. That makes information available to community stakeholders, and it gives community a seat at the table. So one of the things that has to be in a CBA is the community's reference point at the table, not just as a participant, as an accountability. So that gives community stakeholders access to data. If that's not written in the initial agreement, then it doesn't have to be honored. And having access to that kind of data is critical, and it has to be written in to the original design of the agreement.
Kind of piggybacking on what you're just saying, I think long-term checks and balances need to be written in from the very beginning so that, you know, everybody doesn't come to the table and get what they want, or they don't get what they want, and then 10 years later you look up and say, times have changed. Political changes, environmental changes, et cetera. So there has to be, in my estimation, those checks and balances that are reviewed on maybe every year basis, every 2 years, every 5 years. But you can't just meet, let it go. There was something else. Oh, monetarily, if there are benefits that have a price tag to them, I think it's important that those funds, or whatever that process is, that it is in such a way captured so that those funds grow.
This time I want to say something. A couple of weeks ago at the People's Town show and tell that you and your daughter showed some pretty pictures. I passed a note through your tour guide to you asking for the draft community benefits agreement. Did you get that note?
Yes.
Good. I hope you respond to it.
Yes. It's been distributed.
From the chat, some of the things that people would want to see, or some concerns that they have, obviously, is water usage. This was talked about at the last meeting as well. One of the initiatives around water usage could possibly be in a CBA is having some type of water monitoring and data capture as part of the CBA. There were also some questions in the chat, or some concerns about energy usage, and the fact that right now in Georgia, we have seen the largest rate increases if you're a Georgia Power customer in our state's history. So one of the participants said that some residents get paid a direct percentage of revenue. This happened after the Alaska oil spill. So too often the CBAs aren't bringing real resources to the table. So there's a direct correlation between utility assistance that this participant is saying could also be part of a CBA. I just want to make sure that I highlighted that from the chat. All right.
The next question is, what would accountability and transparency look like?
Who wants to take that one? What would accountability and transparency look like in a CBA?
It has to look like the design of an official transparency document. So in any agreement, you have the legal accountability for liability. The administrative accountability needs to be transparent, of course. The project design accountability needs to be transparent, of course. All of the opportunity for sharing profits with the community needs to be transparent. But the liability reference point has to be transparent, because we deserve, as community, to hold all entities accountable. If we're going to hold ourselves accountable as a community that we know everybody, then we should have the same opportunity to hold a business to accountability for the entire liability. That has to be put in writing. So the best way to do that is to have an entire section on the transparency and the accountability for liabilities written out line by line, precept by precept.
Of a data center, I think of it's a built environment. We have rating systems for built environments. You know, LEED certification, green globes. It's interesting that you don't hear of that for data centers, even though it's a built environment. And part of those rating systems, there's ongoing commissioning, talking about accountability. You have to keep up the standard that you built it to. So community benefit should be included in those systems, in those rating systems, should be a requirement, but also just the standard of construction and operation, to the point about metering. And so we don't have to reinvent the wheel with any, there are applied things that just aren't being included in the conversation. And that would give local communities more agency to say, well, if you're gonna come here, you gotta build it to this standard, which I think would eliminate a lot of the, just create a better standard for everybody to start with, because I feel like the conversation is so low right now. They should be asking communities what they need, not the other way around. And I feel like, to the collective thought earlier about, this brings us together, all communities have that in common. So, I love a moratorium and the fact that, we need to make sure that we have time to get it right, excuse me. So I'm also glad we're talking about when the building happens. So I want also the conversation to include a hard no in addition to a CBA. And maybe that hard no is, well, their building standard is so high that we're gonna go somewhere else. And I hope that other community knows, hey, there's a standard. Because what would happen, just in one community, they hold their ground, they're just gonna go to some other community. We need to just raise the bar. Just venting now.
Well, I'll just say that I'm big on transparency and to include the community in these conversations and meeting spaces like this, community meetings, NPUB. We should let everybody know where we are in negotiations and and what we got out of it, and share that information. So I think it should be inclusive and transparent. And to have someone on the oversight committee as well with some kind of legal background. We need that. And benefits don't always have to be monetary. It can be things that we know we need in our community. But of course, we do need funds to keep certain things going. But like the lack of affordable housing, that's just an epidemic now, where we have a lot of homeless people, and we're not trying to, even the budget from Congress is being cut for affordable housing, which is going to increase unsheltered families, separating families. So I'm just thinking that we can invest in that, and also environmental justice concerns, such as flooding. When you build, is to capture most of your water or something on the property that you're building on, green infrastructure. It can be permeable pavers. It can be some of these things in the CBA. And of course, jobs, training, skilled jobs for the youth, at least high school to 25 years old, something in there so they can have some of these jobs, working in some of these places. But I definitely think that transparency is important, because that's what divides and conquers as well. If the community think that something is going on over here and they don't understand because nobody told them, then they start to dividing. I'm not going to be a part of that. Well, they break off from the coalition. So it's just best to be transparent.
Hi, everybody. I'm Natalie. I live in Adair Park, actually right across the street from where this is planned to be built. Well, I should say where the data center, since it's a general conversation, is planned to be built. I appreciate Hakeem for answering questions, and also my Adair Park neighborhood group, because I've been learning a lot. I appreciate, Doctor, I didn't get your name from the last meeting. Yes, you gave us some great information, and I appreciate, is it Dana today, for what you're offering. Just plain level, I'm not a lawyer, I just bought a condo and this is happening. I hear all of these things as far as community environmental thoughts to legal to financial. And in attending our meetings, I feel like we're so far behind because the legislation is happening soon. So I would like for someone to give an example or speak to a timetable on when this board may be formed. And then also, what is the responsibility, like how far do we go as far as obtaining maybe legal representation and how that would be paid for, if anybody could speak to that. And then also, where does our decision, whether or not or a collaborative thought on the community benefits agreement, when does that fall in the timeline of the legislation and the vote? So I appreciate the councilman that was here, but he's gone now. And that's the first person I've met since all of these meetings have happened, so their absence is kind of weird to me too. But from the basic level, somebody literally living across the street, it would be helpful for that kind of insight.
So we're not going to get into the specifics of this project. So I think that's a conversation to be had in a different space. Right now, for this conversation, typically how we've seen it work in other situations is that sometimes once the legislation is approved, the governing board or stakeholder board is established after that, and with the potential buyer and or the purchaser at that time. So all of this is really facilitated on whether or not that sale goes through. That's one thing. And then number two, who is the deciding factor on who actually sits on that board, right? And so you have the purchaser, you have community stakeholders, you have community residents, you sometimes have business community that is part of that group as well. So we have to be very real about sometimes who sits on these authorities. And then what we've seen is that once that sale is facilitated or once that legislation is approved, then that authority then kicks into action. Now, that's given that all of those things happen during that time. Sometimes we've seen that government goes beyond that in trying to put together a project, a legacy project, some type of legislation that then benefits their agenda. And so that can be overthrown, that can be rerouted. And so we've seen instances like that. But for the purposes of this conversation, what we're really trying to do is to make sure that our communities are not left behind in any type of negotiations or any type of conversations, particularly when infrastructure projects and new developments are coming in the community. So I would be happy to have another conversation with you, but I do think for the purposes of tonight, we want to be as general and get information from everyone because we have some different voices in the room, okay? All right, any other questions?
Hi, everyone. Mohammed Idris. I'm over at Morehouse School of Medicine. One question I have for those who are more familiar with CBAs is, are there any good examples of really effective CBAs across the country, whether that be specifically for data centers, renewable projects, or really any sort of large infrastructure projects? Is there anything we could learn from what other people have been able to do successfully?
Data center, but in LA, when the Lakers stayed, that was a great CBA. And oh, I thought it was on. I'm sorry. I say the Lakers Stadium in LA, they have a good CBA. Because to me, what made it be the negotiation part, the communities coming together, even the businesses in that community, and they were able to get what they wanted out of negotiating and coming together as a coalition. Because we actually studied that CBA a few years back when we was looking at different CBAs in New York, and that was one of the ones, I forget the name, but it's some yard, and that demonstrated where community got divided, and it was divide and conquer. Some of them was taking incentives and favors behind the others back to vote their way. So that one wasn't really a good one. And also, it was because the lack of oversight. My grandmother used to say, you get what you watch. So nobody was really paying attention, so you have to enforce that oversight to make sure things are going as planned. So that's the one coming to mind at the LA Lakers Stadium.
And then Dr. Eric.
Yeah, I was the director of the Advisory Neighborhood Commission over in Anacostia, which is an area of Washington, D.C., in 1986 and 87. I'm showing my age. And so along the Anacostia River, which you had to cross the river to get over into that area of Washington, D.C., the thing that worked was that the legal community came over and designed an accountability statement at the level of community participation. And they gave 4 levels of accountability: the accountability of a community participant, the accountability of a community stakeholder, the accountability of a community resource, and the accountability of community partnerships. That gave community members a legal stake in any agreement. And so that was what worked, because even as a community participant with a community agreement, you're not a part of the accountability design. You're part of the network in community benefit agreements, but you're not a part of the design. That's why it's called an agreement. So what really, really works is to have community people be a part of the original design, to be able to design the structure in such a way that the existing business design includes stakeholders, resources, and partnerships, so that they can be informed and build their capacity to participate with the kind of technological knowledge to be a part of the decision-making process. And I know that's a lot to make available to someone at the level of community, but when you do that, it works best. So with the Advisory Neighborhood Commission over in Anacostia, we designed it with the Anacostia Community Development Corporation and was able to put that in existence.
Dr. E.
I didn't tell my name. Is it on?
Yes.
Erica Holloman Hill, affectionately known as Dr. E here in the community. I wanted to go back and reference the CBA that was put in place in Nashville with Stand Up Nashville as soccer. Major League Soccer team was coming into Nashville, and they entered into a community benefit agreement. I think it was the one that really set forth the precedence for the backlash that occurred that I referenced in terms of the law that was passed last year in Tennessee. And so I would suggest maybe looking at that community benefit agreement.
One of the other things that I wanted to mention that was kind of highlighted in the chat is about zoning attached to the CBA as a condition. So basically what we've also seen that has worked but has not worked in certain communities is the developer and or their client representative would come and ask for a zoning request, much similar to 713 Ralph David Abernathy. And if that project was not done and that zoning was approved, then the condition that could go in the CBA is that it reverts back to the original zoning. Because what we've seen in our community is that a lot of times you will come in, you'll tear up the community and ask for the CBA and ask for the zoning request and make a lot of promises, and then the project doesn't get built. So that's also one of the things that, a condition that could be part of a future CBA. Just kind of want to make that note. Let's see if there's anything else here. All right. I think that's it for now. Cam, you want to pass it around? Any other questions?
We're done. If anyone else in the community has a question, please do ask, but we've gone through our questions.
Okay. Just one second. I just want to, online, did you all have any other questions that you wanted us to make sure that we read out loud? I'll give them a minute. All right, Hakeem.
I was just going to add that, you know, my observation on these zoning projects, these development projects that require conditions or CBAs, I treat them all the same. I mean, 20 years ago, I'd go into community on behalf of a church that wanted to expand, and the anxiety in the community about that church expanding was as great as it's been with this data center. And that happened all the time. And it was because at that time, people were building mega churches in the middle of residential neighborhoods. Historically, that's where they'd been, because you go to church and you want to walk to your church from your neighborhood, but then it changed. So now these mega churches are located in communities. So when you walk into the community and say, hey, I've got this beautiful church and it's going to build this addition, and you know, I walk in surprised because I can sit in a room and look at site plans and I can have ideas and you're really going to love this. But for someone in my position, I know that the community has to participate and has to have real facts to be able to inform whatever the project's going to become. That's true for any project, anytime, anywhere. And so, and I go into some communities with a project, identical project that's here, and say, hey, we want to bring this to your community. And they give you a list of 30 things they want you to do. They've already written them out. They said, if you do these, then we will consider it, right? And so we're just talking about these conditions, whether we can satisfy them or not, and whether the community is going to be satisfied or not. And the community says, hey, well, you've done 20, we need 30, or we need 25. And if we don't get all those things, then we're not going to support it. And then you all have the power, because if the community doesn't support it, the elected officials are not going to support it. Well, most of the time, you know, most of the time. I can just tell you as an advocate, advocacy in projects like this is, for me, different than advocating in court. Because the doctor here made some comments at the forum last week that I had not heard, the data collecting. So, and there's other comments. Natalie and I talked for an hour after that forum, and she said a whole bunch of things to me that I have to figure out. And I go back and do my homework with the client to try to understand, not to say, hey, well, what can I say to refute this? It's, what is the answer to this? Because I have these questions too, because I have to speak to this community truthfully, you know, and I think it's all of our obligation in any community we're in to do that. And I think communities lose when a project comes that we don't even want to talk to you. Don't even have a conversation with you. You know, because at the end of the day, a zoning project, is the benefit worth the bargain? You know, is there something that you can get out of this development coming into your community that is worth the burden that everybody's describing that's going to occur? And that's some people can answer it without going to a meeting. Some people need to participate in the meetings to get there. And you know, and you know, for me, I go through the same process as I'm working on projects. I'm learning new facts. You know, I'm learning new facts every day, and I figure out how to do it. And we put our own clients to the test. You know, we wanted to get I don't want to talk specifically. We wanted to get a draft CBA out earlier, you know, than we did, because we thought the community, and then communities asked, well, when is this going to go to a vote? Or are you all going to be willing to defer this application if we're not ready? You know, and so that conversation is always, well, what is the conversation? If everybody's against it, why prolong it? You know, and if everybody's for it, why not go forward? You know, and so it's just a decision as you go. But I just think, and that's the biggest comment I wanted to make, is that because a lot of times I'm in communities where they don't ask questions, they don't come with questions, they don't have lists, they just say no. And I'll slip in around the corner, and I hope none of my clients are listening to me say this. I say, here's a list that I got asked about this same project 2 years ago in another project. I worked on the Beltline. Here's what they wanted, right? Take this list, because I can't ask these questions for you, but you ask me these questions in front of my client, you know? And if you're not asking questions, if you're relying on information, if you're like me in this process, that I don't know what's true, but people are, you know, let's get a shared set of facts so that everybody can evaluate this fairly. Not because I want to get the project approved, I think everybody deserves real information, because here's the other truth. If this developer is coming to the community and wants to put the center here and is willing to invest the money that they're investing in it and proposing to invest in the project, when they go, it's not that, they're not going to be the last one. Somebody's going to come behind them. In South Fulton, everybody wants to develop multifamily housing there. All my projects in South Fulton are multifamily housing. And if they say no to one, another one comes, because they know that's, the market says this is where they go. And so everybody, you know, owes it to yourself to be fully informed, even when you're saying no, about why they want to be here and how they serve you, and whether there is a scenario where you would allow them in some instances, and what are the benefits of data centers. Sometimes there are benefits. I don't know if they outweigh the things that people are saying that are opposed to them, you know, but those are all those things, those considerations that are important. I don't have enemies in these processes. I look at Steve Carr. He and I have had some of the biggest fights around the Beltline, and we fight. But I think he still says hello to me every time I see him, because he knows I'm telling him, I'm going in and saying what I believe. I'm not lying. I'm not making things up for anybody. Right?
Get an attorney to mic, huh?
What's that?
There was a show and tell at the Dunbar Elementary.
Oh, Lord.
Recently. I got there late and I left early because there was no room at all for questions or comments. And politely saying that pissed me off.
Last week?
Yeah.
When you're on the other end of the room, I can yell loud if I have to.
So
I left a comment card. Why no comments? At a public meeting.
That was not my meeting, though.
Okay. So one of the key takeaways, and we have someone from South Fulton here that I would like to allow her to speak is, and we've seen some good examples of CBAs. I will not say that there are benefits to data centers. However, what I will say is that here there's some CBA negotiations and provisions that we've seen work when it comes to infrastructure projects, like tree buffers. We had heard that, sound walls, aesthetic requirements, some traffic mitigation funding. And this is in urban centers as well as rural. We've also seen some local hiring guarantees, often 25 to 50%. Again, that depends on the project and the type of project. Union labor and workforce training pipeline. So with our schools and with our local colleges, community investment funds, so like a community reinvestment fund, to not only house the money, but to make sure with the governor authority that it's allocated properly, environmental monitoring and pollution mitigation, and then transparency, again, that's been talked about tonight on operations and impacts. These are all in Chicago, in LA, in rural areas in Phoenix. One of the things in LA that Ms. Sharice touched on, but I wanted to also mention is affordable housing contributions. There were a lot of that was done. Again, transit access and improvements close to their transit system, and then some digital equity programming going back to schools. And then I just wanted to highlight, too, that a hard no is also part of this conversation that the young lady said when we talk about CBAs as key takeaways. Just no to the project, no to the CBA. So just want to make sure that we note that because this is a community conversation. And then we'll have some takeaways. Becky's been making some notes, and then we'll have our young lady from South Fulton to end us out.
Good evening. Thank you so much. I'm excited about sharing my takeaways. So I've just been taking some notes, and I'm a PhD student at Georgia Tech, and I get to work with Georgia WAND on community-based research, following Kim around and Miss Stephanie and everybody here. So my first observation is just to look around. Some of us know each other, some of you know each other from previous meetings, but this is not the usual suspects. This is not a usual suspects meeting. This is a very broad community meeting with a lot of people here with a lot of different skills, a lot of different experiences, and everyone's concerned about this issue. So that's a very positive thing to see. The second thing is sort of a four-step process. So the first is really just starting with, knowing that as an individual, you deserve better than what's happening in the community or happening across the street from your condo. As a community, we all deserve to not have, I deserve the thing too as an individual. So that's kind of the first step, is coming in and finding some self-help. And then the group is sort of the second step, where everyone I see here is helping each other with different experiences that we've had, whether it's been with CBAs, whether it's been with a certain facility. And then the third level is, wow, like the group here can share and learn from other groups across the state who are dealing with similar issues, and also from the Turner Community Benefits Coalition. That was a long-term process, and it was successful in the ways that you were saying. And I remember being a part of that. We were a part of that. And it wasn't successful because of our, I didn't mean to say those close together like that. And then a fourth level is going from the state to other states and learning from other states and people who are dealing with this all across the South, because the South is frequently the place where the large corporations feel like there isn't enough political pushback. Well, they're all wrong about that. And especially Georgia, we have proven that we are about political pushback. And I'm proud that Tennessee was about some political pushback. I don't know if it's political. I'm not trying to be like political, but you know what I'm saying. They believe that the South doesn't have the political power and that the pushback falls on people who won't listen. Another key takeaway is that everyone is interested in working together. The legal guidance piece of making sure that we read the fine print. We have lawyers like this woman, like this young man over here, who can make sure that the process is airtight. And we're reading the fine print. We're watching to see what they're doing, who's involved. We're listening to people who are involved in the process, who might know insider information about one of the facilities. And we're including people across, wherever people stand in the issue or their involvement in the issue, to see, how we can work together most effectively. And then I also want to point out how important it is that there is a bottom line. There is a line in the sand. see wealthy communities all the time where the McDonald's looks like, an antique, like it has to be this tall and it has to look like, it was from Greece, or whatever. And so those communities have the funds or the political power to be able to say, this is our little community, and, you can't come in if you're not gonna be like this. And so there's no reason why every community can't be that way. And we support, what I'm seeing is, yes, this is ways that we can keep it out of our communities, but how can we also make sure that it stays out of everyone's communities? Like, there is no community that deserves to have their water polluted or the air polluted, or even to have a job for 3 months that's gonna get automated, like the young lady was saying. And so those are some of my key takeaways. I'm sure I've missed many things that are very important that everyone shared, but thank you for letting me sit in.
Again, I live across the street from a data center that was put up. I didn't find out there was going to be a data center. What happened was our neighbor across the street, Mr. Scarborough, sold 167 acres, and they cut all the timber down. So when I started inquiring what we're going to do, what are you going to do, he said he was going to move. And needless to say, our area is like a Sahara desert for June up until November. When you get ready to go out the house, you have to literally put a scarf on your head in order to get to your car and back. It was horrible. Have the car washed, came back the next day. I had the car washed. I went out the house, forgot something in the car. I didn't park in the garage. And I went back out, the car was covered with dirt. Some of my neighbors said that they had offered to pressure wash the house. No one offered me anything. I didn't even know it was going to be a database across the street. I don't know if it was cutting the trees. I heard about the database from a neighbor across the street from me. He had told me that, I heard there's going to be a database across the street. I said, you're kidding, we don't know anything. I called Helen Willis and asked her about it. She said, well, they rezoned it. That area is no longer Union City. It's Union City, not South Fulton. There's nothing we can do. They went on, they built it. Night and day, you hear the trucks coming in and out, blowing their horns, 2 and 3 and 4 o'clock. Some nights I would get up, it's 2:30 in the morning, I'd take that. I inquired, I said, can't we have a noise audience at least we can go to sleep? That lasted for 2 weeks, and they started back again. We haven't had peace in the neighborhood since. The neighborhood was really nice. I've been there over 31 years. I know most of the older people that was in that area. It used to be a nice, beautiful, quiet, semi-country neighborhood. The deers and rabbits used to be all in the front yard and in the back. We don't have that anymore. It's to the point now, the last thing they put up, and they hadn't finished it yet, was these humongous steel electrical poles about 90 feet in height. That stuff, I said, you are endangering our life because all the power that's coming down around us in our house, there's nothing we can do about it. It's terrible. They have destroyed our nice, peaceful neighborhood. Not only that, no one told us, gave us forewarning, not me, and a couple more neighbors gave us no forewarning, this is what's gonna happen to our neighborhood. The neighborhood is totally destroyed. And I'm very sad about it, there's nothing I can do. It's on Stonewall Tail Road and Wexford Road. Thank you.
So as you can see, these are continued conversations that we will have. We want to make sure that all voices are heard. We want to make sure that we're continuing to create a template and a framework for you to be able to use going forward. I hate that that happened to you, but these are continued conversations and real life experiences that are happening throughout the state. So she's not the first one, and she won't be the only one. But the goal here is to have a community benefits agreement if it comes to your community where you can negotiate and that you can put some conditions in and ensure that moving forward that your community is not continuing to be harmed. So I want to thank you all for coming out. Thank you for participating, and hopefully you all will be part of the next community conversations that we have moving forward.
That I think it's important, be it the data center or any other development, that you truly do your homework. Be knowledgeable about both sides, because conversations like this many times get twisted into pure emotions. You know, I've talked to somebody and I hear what they're saying and I'm catching on to that. Listen, but go to the other side. Find out what the developer has to say, not just in a heated room where they almost feel like they have to defend themselves, but really do your homework. Really get to know the other side. I just think it's so important so that your decision that you make is clear and unchallenged within your own mind.
And within your own community, particularly get involved in your own backyard, get information, share information. It's real easy for any entity to roll over one person and two people. It's very difficult to roll over a whole hell of a lot of people. And most people I have found that do get involved, they're reacting to something.
It's the emotion.
Like the EMF coming out of data centers and digital realty.
And that project is the same. I mean, I'm listening to what she has to say about the data center in South Fulton. It's like night and day between what she's talking about and what we're going to be facing here and what we need to look at. Totally different. But people are going to listen and think that is the gospel. That's going to happen in my community. We're going to have these 10-foot or having, poles. And we just have to be very intentional about being realistic about what's in our neighborhood, what we're going to see, what we want to see.
We want to thank Georgia WAND for being able to facilitate this.
Thank you. Now, let me say this, because I don't want to leave on that note. I want to say that every lived experience is important, whether it's City of South Fulton or City of Atlanta. I think what she has to say is very concerning to everyone, and that should be factored into whatever decision that they make. It's just not emotional, right? It's about the fact that it's a real lived experience. And so the goal here is if a no is a no, then a no is a no. But if it goes forward, we still want to be able to arm the community with as much information as they deserve and they need in a CBA, a community benefits agreement that will benefit not only them but their community. And so with that, thank you all so much for coming and look forward to continued conversations.